All right, let's get this mother started, as they say. Let me make sure I have the right audio in. I got the right audio in. I got the right headphones in. I got the right connection. We are experiencing a healthy stream. So, welcome to another edition of the Friday FARcast. A little behind schedule today, but we're going to get there. We are going to get there. And we will be joined. The reason I started a little bit later today is because we'll be joined by Marc Malone in about, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes or so, somewhere between 12:45 and 1 p.m. And Marc is our resident go-to on science, philosophy, the body, and cancer. So Marc and I were talking briefly last night, and this is in response to this, this AI wet dream that Larry Ellison has about mapping the entire genome and creating very gene-specific vaccines for people who have a very specific type of cancer. And this is an area of expertise that Marc knows quite a bit about, or he has. So I thought he'd be a really good person to bring on to talk about the efficacy of this, and also the sort of the moral guidelines for being that invasive with the body. So unfortunately, Marc has firsthand experience because he lost his wife Jillian to a very aggressive form of cancer. And he believes that how she was treated is very similar to what Larry Ellison is talking about. And of course, it didn't really end well for our dear Jillian. So I'm sure Marc will have a lot to say about this. And he'll be on a little bit later in the show. So I have to entertain you for at least a half an hour before that happens. I think I can do it. I think I can entertain you. And if I can't entertain you, then I'm sure Peachy, I can just bring Peachy on for a little bit and she'll entertain you for a brief period of time, even if it's just for seconds. So welcome to the show. It is Friday for some of you folks out there who are in the Monday through Friday 9 to 5 world. Welcome to your weekend. I hope it's going to be a pleasurable and relaxing edition of the part of the week where you don't have to show up and be somewhere on somebody else's dime and time. I was listening to, who was it? I forget now. Oh, it wasn't a podcast. It was a I've been watching a lot of videos about Lenin and Stalin. I just ordered this memoir by Marshal Zhukov, who was the guy who basically won World War II for the Soviets, right? Like he was their lead general, and so in 1971 he wrote his memoirs of the war and strategy. So I thought, it's a pretty rare book. I think I'll get it. So that's on its way. So I spent been spending a lot of time looking at particularly the transition of power in the Soviet Union and how that took place, how long it took place, who was involved, the ramifications of it. I mean, you could spend an entire career, you get a PhD in the rise of the Soviet Union and communism. And, and there's always the above the line story and then there's the below the line story. And if you went into both of those areas, it could be a lifelong, interest and study. So I was listening to this podcast and it was about the life of Lenin, right? And where Lenin came from. Lenin came from an upper middle class family. He wasn't somebody who was, now Stalin Stalin is much more revolutionary material than Lenin, because Stalin comes from a very poor working class family in Georgia, and his father was terribly abusive to him. Beat Stalin so badly that he nearly lost hearing in one ear. And then eventually Stalin's mother leaves the father and winds up, I believe, kicking around and eventually finding a room somewhere where she could raise her and her son. And I think she was a seamstress, which is how she was able to make her living. And eventually she gets him off to religious school, right? So some kind of Orthodox school. And the idea was that Stalin was going to be he was going to be a priest in the Orthodox Church. Like that was his path. And that didn't happen, right? He rejected that. But he comes from the type of class that would be open to a revolution, right? Based on the inequities of the class system that was happening during the Soviet Union. Lenin doesn't come from that class. Lenin comes from the middle class, and he's actually quite well off. What gets Lenin started in the sort of the real revolutionary mode is the death of his brother, and his brother had plotted and conspired to kill Alexander. And so there was a bomb that went off and it didn't do the trick, and they figured out, who were the ones who set the bomb off, and it was Lenin's brother. And so Lenin's brother was executed, and then that put Lenin into kind of overdrive. Like he wanted revenge because he lost his brother. Well, if his brother didn't try to do something stupid, his brother probably would have still been alive, and Lenin, who knows if he would have been a revolutionary or not. But it's Lenin who comes up with the 40-day work week. Before that, there was a wide-scale abuse of workers' rights. And again, I'm not here to, prime the pump of the communist system, but people were working 12, 13, 14-hour days, and sometimes under, absolutely dreadful conditions. And the conditions in the Soviet Union in terms of work were not great because everything was very difficult. But at the very least, at the end of the day, there was the end of the day, right? So this is where we get our 40-hour work week from. It's from Lenin. He's the father of it. So that leads us into the weekend, and I hope that if you are recreating, that it is relaxing, peaceful, joyous, enervating, all those things. My Sherry Analani, she's back. Look at it, like she's back. Somehow she'd been unsubscribed, not by these hands, nor by any other hand connected to these hands, but she's back, and we're glad you're back. Ma Chérie, good to see you. They paint misery in the U.S. about Russia. I think many have very happy lives. I think it's a mixed bag in modern Russia. I think some people are relatively content. It is not what I would call a democratic institution by any means. If you've watched any videos of Russians, we used to watch the Sikov family. Right. We used to watch them, and we used to get some insight into their Russian life. And I think the guy's name is Dan. I think that's his first name. Well, he went to this one town and started walking around, and he noticed that there were cops. And he said, look, if you're ever in a situation where you're in a city or a town and there's cops in Russia, you want to avoid them at all cost because they're very corrupt. Right. They if you do something even remotely let's say you cross the street and it's not in the crosswalk or a traffic light or something like that, they will pull you aside and they will begin a process of not just ticketing you, right, but really kind of working you over, so they can get the most out of you. So there's a level of corruption in the Russian system that's still there, just like there is in any system. There's no perfect system in this world, and I doubt that there ever will be. And so, what's interesting though about the Soviet system is that there were definitely safety nets, right? Like on the one hand, they could take your apartment from you anytime they wanted to. And there's numerous accounts of this where this has happened. They did it. They did it to the czar and the czaress. This is ours now. You get the fuck out of here, right? So that happened. But on the other hand, if you were old and infirm in the old Soviet system, you had a place to go, right? You were not kind of left by the wayside and sort of left to rot. And again, I'm not here to, be a red warrior or anything like that. But based on that system, like it worked. They had a place for people to go. Whereas in our system, it's not that easy, right? And unfortunately, a lot of older people are at the whim and mercy of these these elder care centers where they hire just extremely uncaring and at times even brutal help, right? Where there's a lot of senior abuse. There's not a lot of oversight with some of these places. So again, if you go back to like pre 1990 Soviet Union, there were some things in the system that were built in for the people that that they did have kind of a bit of a social safety net. But on the other hand, when you don't own anything, there's no prospect of you being able to like stay in the place that you live. So in a system like that, then you have to kind of curry favor, right? You have to make sure that you're on the good side of the system. And that's where the whole snitch culture thing comes into play. Like, you're willing to rat somebody out who may have had a few too many shots of vodka one night, right? And decided that they wanted to talk smack. And you kept notes, and then over a period of time, you go to the authorities and you turn their name in. Well, why do you do that? Well, it's not because you don't like that person. Right. It's not because of that. It's not because you have some overwhelming sense of Soviet pride. No, you're trying to curry favor so that there's a better than average chance that they won't move you out of your stinking little apartment. Right. You become useful to the system. And it encourages that kind of behavior, which is unfortunate, So let's talk about just a couple of housekeeping items here. First of all, I believe it was Julie had brought something up. They turned your name in even if you didn't have anything. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Absolutely. Again, it was this idea of currying favor with, literally the lords of the land, the people that could kick you out of your house, right? Or if you had a nominal government job, they could move you out of that and put you in some kind of shit work detail, which isn't great, right? Okay, so let's get into just a little bit of housekeeping before Marc shows up here. So I'm not sure. Should I? Okay. So this is just going out to Julie if you're listening, or you're in the chat, or you show up in the comments. I passed your comment on to Chris at True M Science, and he's going to take care of you. Sometimes things slip through the cracks, but so your goodie bag is on the way. So see, this is the beauty of this, right? Like I get to communicate with the owner of a business, and if something goes awry in one of the ordering processes, or I'm able to text them and say, hey, so and so was asking about this, it didn't get to them, and it's like, we'll take care of it. Sometimes things slip through the cracks. So again, this is the beauty of the system, right? I get to talk to the guy who's actually making the product, who's bringing it to you. You talk to me. Not that I'm the customer service rep for True M Science, but if something does go a little bit south, and you can't get a hold of Chris or THS, and it comes up, I'm happy to pass that along. Right. So that's just one little kind of bit of housekeeping there. And I guess we should talk about True Hemp Science while we're talking about it. True Hemp Science is the sponsor of the show, right? Besides RobertPhoenix.com and me, it is the sponsor of the show. So when you spend $100 or more on some of the best CBD products you'll ever run across, and you type in 15MINS, you will get the aforementioned goodie bag. And for whatever reason, if you don't get it, well, we remedy that as well, right? $150 or more, get you free shipping. And there's always a 30-day money-back guarantee, which I think is one of the best parts of the business model. If you don't like it, you send it back. Usually after about 2 weeks, if you use some of the like the Hypnotica or the Lumina, right, or the Solara, if you use it for 2 weeks, you're gonna experience a bit of a state change, right? You go, I like this. So the return rate is very low on Chris's products, and with the gummies, there's just no return rate at all. The gummies are the shiznit, as they used to say. All right, we got that out of the way. Go ahead if you feel like it. Hit the like and hit subscribe. I'm almost up to 15,000 subscribers. That'd be kind of nice, wouldn't it? Hanging Laundry says, my family was there. My cousin had to join the Communist Party to go to medical school. So her entire family, including my aunt and uncle, were not allowed to correspond with us for years. It was a brutal system on both sides, right? There you go. Tom throwing up that graphic. Marc's going to be here in about 10 minutes, and we'll be able to really jump into the topic du jour. So why don't we do this? I'm going to play a little clip of let me throw this up here for Kelly. She's got this insight here. My exposure and experience with employees in nursing homes is not about finding and hiring horrible people. There are many factors involved, well planned for a very long time. Yeah, I'm sure just by the nature of the system, there's going to be these what's the word I'm looking for? Regressive defaults, right? Now, there are some places that I think are probably pretty good, but those places you're probably going to spend a fair amount of money for too, by the way. Why don't we do this? I'm going to play by the way, Derek Bros and I have broken up. It's official. We've broken up. God, he's got such a thin skin. Such a thin skin. All right, let me pull up this Sam Altman thing, and he is now the poster boy for AI. Of course, theoretically, he built OpenAI. I'm going to use the word theoretically. And now he's chiming in on the social construct here and how theoretically we are going to live moving forward into the future. So let's see what Sam, and I always found his last name to be interesting, Altman, right? Like the alternative man. Or the altered man, as in AI or biosynthetics, transhumanism. Sometimes the name says it all. All right, let's hear what this turtle on the fence post has to say.
I still expect, although I don't know what, and this is over a long period of time. This is not a like next year or, the year after that kind of thing. But over a long period of time, I still expect that there will be some change required to the social contract, given how powerful we expect this technology to be. I'm not a believer that there won't be any jobs. I think we always find new things to do. But I do think like the whole structure of society itself will be up for some degree of debate and reconfiguration. I still expect, although I don't know what.
Okay, so let's talk about that for just a second. I don't think that is out of the question. You bring AI into as many platforms as possible, right? And it will fundamentally change how we do a number of things, almost everything, to be honest with you. So to think that we could just go merrily along and live the way we've been living with AI being, kind of ubiquitous, I think is probably a bit short-sighted, right? Because by default, it will change how we live, right? Just by default, it will change how we, and I think we can guess as to what that might look like. But I think the full scope and totality of it is still beyond a lot of our comprehension. So in a small sample size with AI, let's just do a small sample size. It would not be out of the realm of possibility for an AI bot to gather data on any given individual in a very rapid period of time. And it wouldn't be that hard. First of all, you have all these like people finding services like, People Search or Intellus or whatever, right? And they all basically run off the same database. You have LinkedIn accounts that people have. You have all these different kind of nodes that most people have that are connected to the digital world. Some of them are, theoretically, they're for professional purposes only, right? Like LinkedIn. But it's part of a vast, already available compendium of personal data, right? It's all there. It's all out there. Now, if you have an AI and a bot that, goes out and pulls it all together, right, and synthesizes it into one place, and then you have some other bits associated with it, like maybe some machine learning tools that give a bit of a more abstract kind of representation of who the individual is. Now, all of a sudden, if that is public, and all those sites I'm referring to are, if you pay the fee, they're public, right? They're all public record stuff. But if you have this technology that accumulates all the various bits of data from all these various places, including places where you have your information that may not be inside of People Search. Now, all of a sudden, there is a big picture of you that's easily available on the internet, right? And I know that we don't have a social credit score. Theoretically, we have credit scores, which have been around for a long time, which do in some ways reflect some degree of like social accountability. Like if you have good credit, you're socially accountable. You can be counted upon to repay your loan, right? That's like, baseline shit. But there could be an arbitrary social credit score, or even differently, a social credit ranking, right? Like, because there could be a tool that would grab all of this. And by the way, I've played with Grok over on Twitter, and Grok does a pretty amazing job at synthesizing personal details over what you've been putting on Twitter and some of the influences that you are consistently demonstrating. It's uncannily accurate in a lot of ways. There was an interesting thing I did with Grok, and I asked Grok, so what famous actress would be most suitable for me as a mate? Because I was fucking around with Grok, right? And Grok came up with Julianne Moore, which I thought was interesting, because there was a time in my life, you may not see it now, but there was a time in my life where I looked like the Big Lebowski. Like I looked like Jeff Lebowski, to the point where my kids saw a picture of Jeff Lebowski on my computer, and he thought it was me when he was a kid, and he would not let go of the fact that it wasn't me, and I had to show him a video clip from the movie, which got me in trouble with his mother. That's a different story. But what's interesting is that the woman who is his love interest in that movie is Julianne Moore, who plays Maud Lebowski, right? So it's just a weird little AI thing. But given that, you know, somebody could easily put together like a tool or an app, and they could type in like your name and maybe your birth date if they had it, right? And then through that AI, which I just talked about, which could grab all these different things, they could come up with a psychographic profile of who you are, and they could classify you and put you in a certain category, right? Rebel, nurturer, dreamer, overachiever, right? Like that could happen very, very quickly. Like all those tools are there. And so therefore, you know, the things that we take for granted, you know, like our privacy, you know, our secret selves or whatever, you know, we have a relationship and nurture inside of us, those are all gone. So that would fundamentally change like how we view and interact with one another, right? I remember listening to, I think it might have been like Leo Laporte and the other guy, what's his name? Dvorak. And they were talking about, there was a company that was actually working on this, where you could take your cell phone and you could put somebody in the camera of your cell phone, and you could either take a picture or there would be some kind of QR code, right? And it would automatically bring up a version of a social credit score for that person that you were interacting with. There's that technology is out there, and they've been working on this for a while. So if you wanted to know if the person that you were having a conversation with, then this is based on their social credit score, whatever that means, and whatever those parameters are, or whatever those variables are, they're going to come up, and you know, and it could put a halo on top of your head, or it could put a couple of horns on top of your head, right? And so they've been playing with this for a while. So invariably, it will change how we interact with one another. And that's just from some really basic, like technological assumptions that I've just made. Because all the data is out there. They have the ability to scrape it. They have AI has the ability to organize it and profile it, right? And then they can categorize you. So as long as you have a person's name and their birth date, right, they can just go right in there and, you know, and in some ways, I don't know. I mean, like, you know, we're into typology, right? Well, I'm a Virgo and a Scorpio rising. Oh, I'm an Aquarius with a Scorpio moon. I'm an INFP. I'm a, you know, 4/6 manifesting generator. Like, we love stuff like that. You know, it helps us to get to know ourselves, right? Oh, I'm a hermit archetype. I'm a priest archetype. I'm a priestess archetype. I'm a magician archetype, right? So a lot of this stuff would be marketed in that regard, right? Oh, look, this thing can do all this stuff, and it can, you know, give me a psychographic profile. Oh, this is interesting. You know, it's a reflection of who I am. AI gets me, right? But on a social level, that's where it becomes problematic. And that's just the first step, you know, and then we're not even talking about the hardcore social credit scores, right? So in some ways, Sam Altman he's right, right? But in other ways, he's right to the degree that he wants to begin to be engaged in those discussions about altering the social contract. He wants to be the one driving that conversation. All right, let's bring in our man of the moment. He is recuperating from a household full of children who've got the sniffles. So let's see how long we can get him for. There's our guy, Mr. Marc Malone. Hi, Marc.
How's it going, my friend? How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing up there?
Surviving. Yeah.
You coping? Are you coping?
Well, I've been through the equivalent of multiple full-scale wars at this point in the last couple of years. It is a miracle that I'm coping, but I find a way.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, doing all right. When you reached out to me about this, I don't know much about Larry Ellison specifically, but it is interesting the timing, of course, because Russia just touted their first mRNA cancer vaccine. So we knew this was coming some years ago. They were touting this back in like 2020, 2021. And it's an important topic. This is if you get a bad cancer, it's the deadliest disease that there is. So this is the critical juncture of really disease itself. And overcoming this at its worst is the hardest disease to overcome. So very important topic. And I'm glad that we can talk about it.
Yeah, well, fortunately and unfortunately, I thought you were the guy to go to on this.
Yeah.
Because you had a first row seat over the process.
Yeah.
And so just if you've been kind of out of the loop for the last couple of days, so Ellison is proposing that there is going to be a large-scale effort, like a Manhattan-style project, to figure out how AI can uniquely interact with everybody's body, meaning that it will know, your gene codes and your genetic markers and all this stuff, right? And so, if the individual has a predisposition for a particular type of cancer, that they could specifically create an mRNA-based vaccine for that. Now, I don't know if they plan on creating the vaccine in response to a cancer being present or a cancer that could be possible in the future, right? They're not clear about that, but this is the idea. This is going to be the interface between high-speed, high-powered genomics computing and essentially mapping out the landscape of everybody's body.
Right.
So I think it's personally, you can't convince me that these people have any investment in our health, well-being, and longevity. So let's just throw that out the fucking window.
Yeah.
Right. So what is really going on behind this? I have my theory about it, but I want to really hear what you have to say about it, both from having an up close and personal experience with kind of a variant of what they're trying to do. And then you and I talked about this maybe sometime over the last couple times you've been on the show, that this was where this was going, right? That there would be this hardcore synthesis between big pharma and big tech, and that they would be welded at the hip, and that this is kind of the Frankenstein sort of version of that. So why don't we talk about your experience, what that was like, and then let's get into the hypothetical realm.
Well, yeah. So from a social engineering perspective, from a technocracy perspective, obviously the premise is that society is run by experts, right? That's the premise of technocracy. So not representative government. And if you know, we of course have been moving in that direction rapidly from 2020 onwards. So that's like the philosophical premise. So when you see that as a premise, it makes sense that Elon Musk is where he is, or Larry Ellison is where he is. And you know, we talked about this before, and this really does apply to cancer vaccines. When I talked about this on the election stream with your show, I talked about, you know, that they have a philosophy of pragmatism, and it's important that not all of them have this necessarily evil intention, though some do. Some don't. Some are just pragmatists, and there is a pragmatic argument you could make for something like a cancer vaccine, for example. Though I'm going to provide some what I would say are better solutions. However, it's logical, unlike the coronavirus one, because when you're dealing with a disease, take the kind of cancer Gillian had, you take a pancreatic cancer, you take a glioblastoma, where it's going to kill 9 out of 10 people, you have very little to lose if you're looking at almost certain death. But when you catch the sniffles, epigenetic modification is not necessary. So just from a pragmatic standpoint, this is a completely different world to what we dealt with before, where there was just really no necessity in what they did before. I can understand the philosophy of why you would create something like this, though there are better ways to do it. But that is only for people that have been diagnosed with the disease, not for those that may or may not get it. Because I can explain the biochemistry here, but there's all sorts of things that can trigger cancer. And it happens not in the genes, but in the mitochondria. And the genes respond to the mitochondria. So as far as my personal experience, of course, my late wife was diagnosed with a very aggressive triple negative breast cancer, which is already one of the most aggressive cancers. But in her case, it was 100% cell replication rate. That's metric is called Ki-67. So she really had the most aggressive form of the deadliest disease. And we had a lot of treatment that is kind of like what this vaccine is going to do. We used some specialized chemotherapy, which evaded natural immune cells and targeted specific gene mutations in her tumors, kind of a version of what this vaccine is trying to do, especially the Russian one. And it did nothing to slow the cancer down at all. And I can also explain why that's the case. So the only thing that actually slowed down Jill's disease, despite the 8 doctors and $500,000 we spent and the very sophisticated treatment, was what I did. And I slowed down the disease by looking at it from a molecular point of view and from a biochemistry point of view, which I'll explain. So in that journey, obviously, I cared for Gillian and treated her until she died. I treated her at the beginning and towards the end. And there was this whole middle period, which I wasn't really involved in. And that is where it escalated very, very quickly. So I've seen the devastation it does and how it wastes someone away. It's really a horrible way to go. From a treatment perspective, unfortunately, there's a lot of lack of there's a lack of sophisticated evidence on both sides of the aisle. I'm going to be frank about it. The Rockefeller medicine, the conventional medicine, yes, for sure. And I made my arguments with them and put forth my arguments against them in person. Their treatments did nothing and mine did. But there is also a lot of lack of sophisticated evidence in the alternative treatments as well. Not because they're inherently wrong, but because cancer is not a monolithic disease. So just because someone did the PET dewormer, and I'm trying to avoid the names because I don't know if it'll trigger the algorithm, but just because someone used that successfully doesn't mean another cancer patient can use that successfully.
Right.
And there's lots of reasons for that. But the main reason is that those drugs, those repurposed drugs, absolutely are an effective cancer treatment. But again, one won't work for all cancers. One type of gene mutation, like albendazole, for example, can target like a TP53 gene mutation, which is very common in cancer, but not everyone has that gene mutation. So one person can take it and it can crash half their cancer, another one could take it and it could be nothing. Right. So when people's lives are on the line, we definitely have to be very, very careful, you know, with how we're looking at this and what we're promoting. So that's kind of my overview as far as what I've done. So obviously, as a widowed father of small children, babies at that point, 1, 2, and 3 years old when she died a year and a half ago. You know, I had to take a lot of time to repair my brain, which took about a year. I had to grieve a lot. Eventually, after about a year of her post her death, I wrote the treatment paper on what I did with her, submitted it to some science journals, which is in peer review right now. But I will say that we did have 5 doctors peer review it at the time. So it's already been peer reviewed multiple times. So it's already past peer review in reality. And that treatment paper will be published soon. And that will make me the first sole author in history of a cancer treatment that is also epigenetically modification. And it will also make Gillian the first cancer patient in history that we have in her cancer type, triple negative breast cancer, to have epigenetic hormonal cell receptors growing on them. Now those things all sound really niche, but that's 2 worlds first that has never happened before. And why that's so important is if I could get Jill's cells to grow receptors epigenetically without any toxification, without any mRNA tech, then that means that this could be done safely, cheaply, effectively, without risk, without artificial intelligence in the body. And it can also be done for other genetic diseases, such as those that people are born with, which is the primary goal here. So in other words, if I could change the properties and function of Jill's cancer cells, then why can't we do it with someone who's got a born with disability or something like that? So that, which would be my next goal. So it's a cutting edge science, and we've managed to achieve a couple of world firsts, which is you know, does not make any of it worthwhile. Of course, I would rather not have those things. And Gillian survived, obviously.
Right.
But at this point, all we can do is make the best of the experience and try to have less men like me in the world. And that's my goal out of all of this.
Let's talk about AI for a second.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of people, when they hear that, you know, they think of it as being this kind of demonic strain of technology that's being unleashed on the public. You know, and I think whatever is, you know, like today, you know, for the thumbnail, you know, I use an AI image generator, and I don't have a problem doing that because, you know, frankly, I'm not an artist, right? Not in that regard. So I don't have any guilt over using AI to whip up an image of, you know, Donald Trump as kind of a Mad Hatter, you know, overturning calendar, scale, and time. And at the same time, right, it's one of those tricky things, like where, you know, if you get too used to it or begins to do too many things for us, it makes us perhaps a bit less human. Based on your work and your research, the things that you've been doing, would you say that they are that it is AI exclusive, or is there a place for AI even in your work?
Yeah. So the fundamental problem with AI is we use philosophy so much that we think we don't use philosophy at all. Like philosophy is so deeply embedded into the human condition that we don't even realize we're using it. Everything is philosophy. Everything is worldview. Everything is built upon our assumptions about life. So the primary issue with AI is the philosophy of which is being coded into it. In other words, it is the engineering formula, right? And
Right.
the easy one to think about this would be its ethical formula. Its ethical formula is being generated by people, of course. Well, what philosophy is their ethical formula? Well, it's some kind of amalgamation of neoliberalism and social liberalism, French Revolution social liberalism with some post-World War II neoliberalism. It's an amalgamation of these 2 worldviews. So that is what is being engineered in, and that's obviously problematic for a lot of reasons, primarily because social liberalism as a philosophy does not value truth as the highest order. So and where many of our great philosophers of history did, of course, truth was the highest value, the North Star. So the problem with AI is ultimately a philosophical one. And if we put in the right philosophical parameters, AI could be a very useful tool for us, because it wouldn't be thinking for us. We have put in the thinking model. It is just speeding up what we would do anyway. And in that scenario, it can work really well. In the scenario where we let it do the philosophy for us is where it's going to be really problematic, obviously, especially with the engineers that are putting those parameters in. So that would be the really big issue with it. Consciousness obviously cannot be generated artificially, right? So this idea that AI would become sentient, I don't know how that's possible, because we don't create our sentience. We don't create consciousness, right? Consciousness is moves through us, and it's of course like the big mystery of the human condition. So AI being sentient, I can't see how that's possible, because it's a, no matter how much faster than us it gets and how much more sophisticated in its computational speed, it is still ultimately a creation of ours, whereas we are a creation of the divine, of God, of source, and which we don't understand ourselves. So we're kind of plugged into the mains of creation itself, right? Of the creator. It isn't, but its speed would be so much faster than ours, and its ability to problem solve in strict parameters. But most people operate in strict parameters. That's the problem. Most human beings operate very predictably, very ritualistically. So AI would be able to outthink the vast majority of humans very quickly, very easily, because of the predictability and the probability. You know, AI, especially when we're looking at ChatGPT or something like that, it's a probability model. So what it does is it will scale the data set that has existed on the World Wide Web. And then it will say, well, if let's say you type in a sentence, write me a cover letter for a job. Well, what it will do is it will scale all the available data set on the World Wide Web. And then it will say, well, the probability that someone uses this term confident is 750,000 times, and someone uses this term affluent 100,000 times, and therefore the probability that confidence is going to be better based on the data set is much higher. So I'm going to throw that into your cover letter. That's very, very rudimentary view of how it would work. Human beings being so predictable and ritualistic, it's a probability game. It's going to win very easily. It cannot generate completely new ideas, but how many human beings generate completely new ideas?
Right. And how many new ideas are there to be completely generated? That's another question. Yeah.
It's tough. I mean, so one example, we could look at this with disease. When it comes to cancer, cancer has all the available data points that exist, pretty much, that we would need. Now, they're so disconnected. This is what I did with my treatment. I'd like to explain like how the cancer thing works, by the way, so people can understand this vaccine thing. But what I did with my treatment is I basically connected all the disconnected pieces of data and drew a blueprint of how cancer works. So AI would be able to do that. But what it can't do is approach a novel disease that we, like, for example, autism, like actual born autism, not autoimmune derived autism from some like pharmacological damage, but an actual born with disability. We have so little data on what that actually is. AI wouldn't be able to generate that information because we don't have that information. We have to discover it. So that's a problem that it'd be very weak with. But with something like cancer, where the data points are available, but they're just very disconnected, well, that AI could do a pretty good job with. Now, again, the problem is where we get into who's creating the formula for it. It could do a good job isn't me saying it will do a good job. I'm saying it could do a good job if the tool was in the right hands, which it isn't right now, unfortunately. Yeah. So that's pretty much how it would work. But yeah, so I was going to, so I'm going to just draw it out like this. So you have DNA. Let's see, is my pen working? My pen's not working. Let's try this one. DNA is hardware. RNA is software. And then protein is application. So if we think about this like a computer or a phone, you have the DNA is the hardware, RNA is the software, and the protein is the app. So the cancer vaccine is supposed to sequence the RNA to create a protein in the cancer cell. So this would be the cancer cell. The vaccine's supposed to say, okay, create this protein, which would be like some cell receptor that your natural immunity T cell could attach to. So what they want to do is they want to go into the cancer cell, communicate it to create some protein or what they call a neoantigen, and then your natural immunity could lock into that antigen and could kill the cancer cell. That is actually what immunotherapy does, which we already have. So immunotherapy, like pembrolizumab, locks into these things called PD-L1 receptors on a cancer cell. So immunotherapy does this. So what it's kind of trying to do is do what immunotherapy does more effectively. But here's where the side effects would come in if this was done wrong. You could imagine that this sequence is communicated to a healthy cell. Well, this healthy cell now kills another healthy cell. What if the healthy cell grows this protein, and then now the body's killing itself, and that's what we call autoimmune disease? That would be the biggest side effect that would come from this. The other side effect would be the cancer is a very adaptive disease. These cell receptors and these antigens, they adapt all the time because cancer is us. Cancer is us, right? And we're adaptive. We're evolved to survive. So the problem is that a cancer cell, you lock into one channel and it will switch to a different one. Just like when you try to kill healthy cells, they'll metabolically change. So it's ineffective. It is potentially dangerous because for example, one of the proteins they wanted to lock into. I'm sorry, I'm getting really into the weeds, but
no, it's good. It's good. We got a smart audience.
So FOXO1 was one of the proteins. Well, it's a transcription factor, but the idea is that let's just call it a gene, and it's very present on a lot of cancer cells. So they would communicate that into the body. The cancer cell would spring this up, and then your natural immunity would lock into it and kill it. But we do have those on like stomach stem cells and things like that. So I could see the risk of maybe some healthy stomach stem cells growing that and getting attacked. But you're dealing with a really deadly disease. Again, it's not the coronavirus where there's no benefit. You're dealing with a deadly disease. You don't have a ton to lose. The thing is that I mentioned this to you when I text you. The biggest loss here is like what I saw personally, which is that if anything, we're going to spend tons of money and give lots of hope, and then the patients will just die. And that's really the most common thing I see with cancer treatments. They're like, oh, a new breakthrough in cancer. There's no breakthroughs. They're not getting the problem solved at all. They're always this major breakthrough. They're not doing anything because they're not treating the problem correctly at all. So my biggest concern will be that it will just the cancer patients will just die faster, or they'll die doing treatment that's not going to help.
Right.
If we get into the realm of giving this to people that haven't got cancer yet, well, that's really a very serious problem, both from a health perspective and an ethical perspective. There's nothing really to lose of a cancer patient doing it, except that it's not going to help, probably.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then, I think then you're in this place where if you or your loved one has cancer and it's not successful, well, it's like, well, we tried, right? We tried, and it's an experimental treatment, or it's something new, and don't worry, the loss of your husband or your wife or your son or your daughter, it'll go towards the evolution of science because we'll learn something from this, right? That's kind of the narrative, right? And so they can get away with that for a long period of time, because it's generally accepted that in many cases, people never come back from this. And if they have this new magical vaccine, and not just any vaccine, an mRNA vaccine that is supposed to specifically target that thing while the person is actually exhibiting the symptoms, they have some wiggle room, right? They have some latitude for it to not work for a period of time. Over a longer period of time, I think it'd have to be under some kind of greater scrutiny. The part that, excuse me, the part that, you know, is disturbing is, well, you have this, you being a patient, have this potential condition. And so we're gonna nip that in the bud, and we're gonna use this specific mRNA technology to monitor that condition. And then if for some reason it becomes viral or it becomes metastasized, well, now this mRNA will kick in and will then go after that specific cell or that specific genetic marker. That to me is potentially scary, right? Because number one, what's that mRNA vaccine going to do until that moment's noticed? Like, it's going to be in the body. And there's always going to be unintended consequences for something like this. But it also reminds me of when Angelina Jolie supposedly found out that she had this predilection for breast cancer and then had her breasts removed, theoretically, you know, or she had this predilection for cervical cancer and then had her ovaries removed. Like, these are all things that we were told. Whether or not they happened or not, I don't know.
People do that, you know.
I know they do that, right? And she was, but again, at what cost, right?
It doesn't work anyway, because, you know, cancer cells exist in the blood. Like, that cancer is circulating tumor cells. They float throughout the body, and tumors are just their staging place. But it exists in the blood. It's everywhere. So you can't kill it by chopping off a limb. And of course, which is why cancer often comes back and back and back again. These cancer stem cells must be dealt with fundamentally. That's why I was able to regress Gillian's disease. No one else was, because I killed cancer stem cells and I figured out how to do that, which is the core of cancer.
Right.
While also epigenetically modifying them, which was not intentional. But that was actually more important for science and for health long term.
Can you, for people that don't understand what that means, can you tell them what epigenetically modifying that cancer cell looks like and what the definition of that is?
Yeah. So I'm gonna. Could you see? Was drawing on this paper helpful or not?
Yeah, for the most part, I think so.
So let me do that again, because this is complicated stuff. So I'll explain kind of like the base. There's just like 3 steps to a cell, okay, and we'll call that. So we have a cell, okay, and then we have receptors on the cell, like we just talked about. So these are cell receptors. So we have receptors on the surface of the cell, and then inside the cell we have what is called signal transduction pathways, and then you have the cell's fate. So you have like cell death, transformation, or alive, we'll call it, survival. So basically there's 3 steps. There's a cell, there's a receptor, there's signals inside, and then there's the fate of the cell. It's either going to die, it's going to transform, or it's going to be alive. So most cancer treatment focuses on this receptor aspect. The problem with Jill's cancer and a lot of cancers, which is why it's not effective, is that these receptors don't work so well. Some cancers don't have them. So what was different about my treatment is I got into the middle of the cell, what we call signal transduction pathways. And this is where all the genes are. This is where all of the deep microRNA is, protective oncogenes, all this kind of stuff. So my treatment triggered inside the cell. Now, inside the cell, we have loads of nodes, like lots. It's like a circuit board. Think about it like a circuit board of a computer inside the cell. And within that circuit board, if you trigger it one path, the cell will die. And that's what we want to do with a cancer cell. We want to trigger a specific circuitry inside so it dies. But if it's a healthy cell, you want to keep it alive. And that's what your exercise and your diet and your meditation does. It triggers a different pathway. And then, of course, if we're doing epigenetics, we're triggering that cell to transform how it operates. So that's a different pathway again. So you can think about it like you're at the fork on the road. You've gotten inside the house. And then you're like, if I go up these stairs, this is going to happen. If I go up these stairs, this is going to happen. If I go in the basement, this is going to happen. And what's tricky about complex disease like this is that we want to kill the cancer cells and not the healthy cells. We want to epigenetically modify some cells but not other cells. So then the real key to this is how to differentiate. In a cancer case, how do you differentiate between healthy and diseased? And there's really two fundamental ways that I figured this out. And one of them is very well known in bioscience, and one of them is much less well known. So the one that's fairly well known in bioscience is aerobic glycolysis. So what that means is that cancer cells, they kind of swap oxygen for glucose. They absorb a lot more glucose than oxygen because the mitochondria is damaged. And mitochondria can be damaged from bacterial infections, all sorts of things, carcinogens, toxicity, microplastics, pesticides, you name it, you pick your problem. The mitochondria gets damaged, it gets acidic, for example, lactate acid, and then it will begin to spiral. The cell will go into aerobic glycolysis. It will pull in more glucose instead of oxygen, and then the cancer genes will become cancer. But you see, this happens after these other things have happened. It's not like the cancer gene just goes, boom, I'm going to become cancer tomorrow. There's like damage that has to come in, and it can come in from all sorts of, it can come in from lithium in the water, you know, in the tap water, for example.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how the disease happens. So what I did with the treatment is I found some compounds that would be able to lock into cells that would produce aerobic glycolysis. And that was how I was able to kill Jill's cancer stem cells, essentially by the compound goes into the body, no mRNA tech, just very cheap pharmacological and natural compounds. It goes into the body and it goes, oh, aerobic glycolysis, not aerobic glycolysis, locked into the cancer cells and killed them at the core, in the blood, at the stem cell level. So that's one thing. And it also generates ATP energy very differently. So cancer cells generate only 3 types of ATP, and healthy cells generate 32 types of energy. So you could imagine like it's like a lighthouse. A healthy cell lights 32 different colors, and a cancer cell lights just a couple. So if we can understand these things, it makes, those are the 2 fundamental things that cancer can do, that really almost all cancer does. And by understanding that, we can treat cancer effectively, and we don't have to use mRNA tech, as I proved. The epigenetic part with Jill is, we triggered a specific pathway in the cell, and it forced her cell to change and grow receptors of which they didn't have before. And again, this wasn't done with any tech. It was just done by triggering a specific path in the cell. This is what's so interesting about the human body. Like, we actually have like inbuilt in us the code, you know, and who is it? Like Joe Dispenza and people like that have been talking about this stuff for a long time, about how environment changes epigenetics and stuff.
Right.
Yeah. And that absolutely is the case, but there's a caveat to that, which is there's so many variables. Like, what changes yours won't necessarily change mine. Like, so it's not as simple as just change your mindset and your genetic code is going to change, but the principle is correct. So we have within our cells the nodes, everything it needs. What we have to do as good scientists is go, what nodes can we trigger to get this cell to operate healthier? If it's autistic, if it's Down syndrome, if it's Alzheimer's, if it's cancer, to change its properties and go back to its default state. And with Jill's, we didn't get it back to its default state, but we did change it. It's never been done in a human patient like her, and there's no record of it. And I did it for like, I don't know, it cost me $300, $400 for the compounds to do that, and they were perfectly safe, no toxicology whatsoever.
Right.
Yeah.
So epigenetic essentially means the environment.
Epigenetic just means that sorry, I forgot to explain. Epigenetics means that the genes essentially will adapt and change. So that could mean they shut down more, that could mean they open up more. So like it's complicated, but essentially it just means the gene will change its behavior, which, if you do it properly, will change the behavior of the cell, and therefore the system as a whole, because as you will know, like the system as a whole is interconnected, right? Everything's interconnected. It's throughout our system. So yeah, it just means the gene will change its properties and behavior from either being closed off or opened up.
Right. Okay, good. A lengthy but thorough and rewarding explanation.
Thank you. Sorry.
No apologies.
I had to try to do it justice, so it made sense. Otherwise, I feel like I'd be half explaining something, and then people will just be confused.
Yeah, no. We'd rather you take the time and get to the root. And speaking of time, I know your time is limited, and I don't want to keep you here for too long. But I do have another question for you, because there's another side to this whole Project Stargate thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the development of specific mRNA vaccines based on very specific and individualized cases and chances for cancer. It's also an information sharing hub. So this is the thing that I think a lot of people kind of glanced over and didn't really pay attention to when Ellison was talking about this, and that if you were on a, let's say, a reservation somewhere up there in South Dakota or North Dakota, and you were a doctor on that reservation, that you would have the same access to research and information that somebody at Sloan Kettering or Johns Hopkins or Stanford or Duke would have at their disposal, right? And then theoretically, they would also be in the same network and have the same kind of access to the information that the doctor and the reservation would provide, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, we're getting into some very dangerous territory here, because that gets back to your idea of these technocrats and these people who have this theoretical great skill or great power or great appearance. They're the ones that will determine what the oncology is, or where this thing is driving. Like, let's say the doctor in the reservation in South Dakota found that, I don't know, black cohosh, for whatever reason, had a very interesting effect on cancer cells. And if it was a truly meritocratic kind of network, that information would go back to Johns Hopkins or go back to, Stanford or Duke or whatever. And they'd say, hey, this guy over here, he's got some interesting things that he's figured out that aren't part of our model. But I don't think it's going to work that way. I don't think it's going to be a two-way or multivariate process. It feels like you're going to have your experts connected out to all these different nodes, and it's a one-size-fits-all kind of practice. And that's what I think kind of escaped what people were thinking about when they heard this. They just heard cancer, mRNA, AI, bad. But what they weren't hearing was sort of this general locus of knowledge and information that would become the hub for everything, without any other kind of potential variation or variant or other discussions that come in. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of a funny example of this. So I keep going into different industries and, like, without any experience, and going in and being like, yeah, you guys don't know what the fuck you're doing. So adult, like, you're all just doing this wrong. I'm gonna like, I did this with politics. Went in and just like, this is a bunch of bullshit. This is actually what you need to be focusing on. This is what you need to be doing. I have a habit of going in uneducated and messing up other people's systems. And I'm doing it again now with a different industry and different system. And yeah, they don't like that, because they've worked really hard to have their experts be able to dictate the terms for this exact reason, because they want to be able to be in control of the terms of, like, they don't like that their multi-trillion-dollar project could be replaced with something that costs a couple of $100 per patient that I
Right. Right.
Now, of course, we know it's much more than about money the further you go through this. And it depends on which layer of the cake we're looking at. But ultimately, it doesn't matter whether it's about money at the middle level or whether it's about control at the higher level. The result remains the same, which is that they want their structures in place to be able to dictate and facilitate. So they're pretty happy for, as long as you're using their stuff, they're happy for it to be used, everywhere. I think and of course, this is the centralization of everything, right? Like, if we look at technocracy as it'll come through, like, your insurance will cover the mRNA, but it won't cover what I do. even
Right.
though what I do has proven efficacy and safety tolerance, which is very important here. But it won't cover it. And that's how they play the game. That's how the system works, right? They make it impossible for you to choose
Yeah.
anything outside of their operating window.
Right.
So
Right.
that I think would be the kind of the surface level problem. But at a deeper level, I do think the biggest concern, and this isn't something that's going to happen soon, but we will get there, is this eugenics side of genetic modification.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Where we start to say, look, I mean, my son's got a very serious disability and was born with it. He's never had anything injected. He's never taken a pill, nothing. He was born this way. Now, what should he have been killed in the womb, right? Like, you know, he's very disabled. He has a very difficult life. And this kind of genetic modification would be, well, let's just we'll just not have that child and we'll just create a different one. And I think that there are serious concerns with that because we don't know enough about the knock-on effects of this. Like the way that I explained it there, we really do not know enough about. There are 1,000 different points that one gene can touch throughout the body, right? Like,
Yeah.
so it's this very, very complex interconnected network. We have to be really careful. We start like pushing things around. That's why I'm using the nodes that exist within the body to do it itself. That's why I trust this. That's why it worked. But if we start trying to communicate an external signal in rather than letting it triggering the right path within it to do it itself, which is a very different model, we have no idea what the knock-on effects could be, not just like health-wise, but like personality-wise. Do people become psychopathic? I mean, that's possible because
Sure.
you know, do people become autistic? Do people become this? I would honestly be much more afraid of people becoming more psychopathic, which we could easily become through genetic modification. You know, and that would be my biggest concern.
Well, I think that there are a number of stories that have been circulating where people who know people who went through the COVID ritual have shown personality changes. They're not the same people in a lot of ways, for various reasons. They can be more abrupt. They can be more angry, dismissive. And there's other variables that have kind of, you know, crept into their personality. But this is not an uncommon theme that people have been talking about since then. So if you're taking that out and putting it into a massive or grand scale, I mean, you're completely re-engineering the human being to be something completely different, right? Like,
That's my concern for sure. Yeah,
yeah,
because so many of these genes, for example, are located in the frontal lobe or in the hippocampus or in the brain. So, and the ionic balance, like calcium, CA1 neurons in the hippocampus, which is all about like long-term thinking, creative, like abstract thinking. That's what I'm saying. Like, it's so complex that if you trigger like the gene, you say, oh, let's turn that one down so they don't get a disease. Like, we'll turn it down so they don't get Alzheimer's. Well, now you've weakened, say, the hippocampus so they can't be creative or as philosophical anymore.
right,
And they are now dulled down and more psychopathic. And this is a very real possibility with where the tech is going and with the knowledge we understand about bioscience. That is what I would be very afraid of. Yeah, is them changing the personality of the human being and playing God with us rather than trying to restore us to default, which is what I'm doing, which is to restore the body to its default state, not trying to change it, you know. So I think we have to be very, very cautious of that, you know, for sure.
And this really gets back to the initial kind of dive we took into AI. It's like who's programming it, and what is the ultimate philosophical backbone behind the program, right? Like, you know, maybe if you were programming it from, say, the perspective of Soren Kierkegaard, C.S. Lewis, Plato, you know, I don't know, maybe Krishnamurti, right? Like you would have a very different kind of outcome for these parameters, and it would promote a very different kind of sort of information set and flow. But to your point, that's probably not the model that they're going to be building these things on.
Yeah, and also, knowledge, philosophy is like five categories, right? So metaphysics, the higher realm, and the higher thought, ontology, the nature of reality, the nature of us, and the nature of our world, epistemology, knowledge, and all the different knowledge categories, ethics, behavior and morality, and then aesthetics, beauty and ugly. So metaphysics, ontology, epistemology, ethics, and aesthetics. So these are the five kind of cornerstones of our existence, right? And they're not programmed in, these AI systems not programmed by philosophers that understand this. And so it's a very, very narrow focus of ethics, which is like fourth down the list, and then epistemology, which is third down the list. And it's a very narrow view of two cornerstones of philosophy. And of course, their knowledge category, the epistemology they're using, is largely empirical, which is, of course, like observation. And again, that's important, but there's so many other types of knowledge: logical, rational, coherence. So it's like that, yeah, and that's really a serious problem, because then it'll say there is no evidence of I don't know, there is no evidence of the divine, and therefore like AI won't exist, right.
We can't quantify the spirit.
Right. Yeah. But again, if we broaden to philosophy as the whole corpus, we understand that divine wouldn't need to be observed to be understood, just in the same way that I cannot observe logic. Logic is an abstract formula that we cannot observe. Like I cannot observe the principle of the excluded middle, that something cannot be true and false at the same time. We just know it to be true, because then we can test that logical principle in reality and we can see it. But you can't, like, logic doesn't like exist tangibly, but we know it's real. We know it. So the divine is just the same. The spiritual is just the same. We know. And then we see how it plays out when we test it in reality. We see how it plays out when we see someone who has the divine in them versus not, just in the same way that we see when someone acts logically and doesn't. So if we were to tune the system properly, it could be a really useful tool. We're not going to be able to get away from it. So I'm hoping that we can get control of it somehow, in the same way that I've done with the political system. I worked within the political system to get as much for us as we could, because otherwise we're going to be crushed by technocracy. So why not drive technocracy out of what's supposed to be ours anyway?
Right.
And then we have power to fight and crush them if we need to. The art of war is the same with the technology. I believe we have to have our hands in it. I don't like it. I would prefer it to not exist, honestly, but it does exist.
But it's there. The cat is out of the bag.
It's there. And just like I would prefer technocracy not to exist, but we have to operate in the reality we have. So we have to have philosophical input into the system, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I've got to jump, sir, but it's been a pleasure, and thanks for
being on. Thank you so much for being on. You were here, I think, a little bit longer than you wanted to be or could be, so really appreciate that. And we'll catch up with you somewhere down the line, and hopefully you get this paper squared away, and you get the right kind of authentication you need for it, and it could really start to turn some heads. And would love to have you back on when that happens.
Yeah, it'll be out there soon. And then we'll see what the next chapter looks like. I have no idea. You can't plan anything anymore in my life. So
all right,
I'll
catch you offline. I'll catch you offline, Mark.
Thanks, Mo.
Yep. See you. Bye. All right, the great Marc Malone. So I bet you learned a couple things today, right? But you know what Marc reminds me of? Marc reminds me of a user-friendly version of Shiva. That's who Marc reminds me of. Think of Shiva in a more kind of engaging, a sort of quid pro quo persona. That's who Marc reminds me of. And I'm just, I'm really happy that he's a part of my life and a part of our lives. And, and how I met him is, it's just one of the happenstance and kind of random miracles. Yeah, Shiva with a heart. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I was Jillian, his wife, was my client. And she was a terrific person, a wonderful person. And she tells me she's got this guy that she met, and can you look at his chart? And I looked at his chart. I said, yeah, man, this guy's a winner. I go seal that deal. And sure enough, that's what happened. So, if it wasn't for Jillian, life is just so weird this way, right? First of all, I have to become an astrologer in order to do this, and then I have to have a YouTube channel, which started off as a blog talk radio channel. And then through that, I meet people, and then eventually these connections come to the surface, and they manifest in very unusual and unforeseen ways. And it's kind of the beauty of life and our journey of life. So don't ever forget that. And even though Marc's last year has been, well, for lack of a better term, marked with sadness and grief, right? Out of it is coming this very deep dive into the condition which forced his wife out of his life. And as you can tell, he's all in on it, and there could be some really interesting breakthroughs as a result of it all. So life is really, it's a trip that way, total trip. And anyway, we wish him all the best and all the strength and good health to complete his mission. All right, I was gonna get into all the shit that Trump has done, but I don't want to go there right now. Because it's been a very interesting, since Monday? Holy shit. Like, it just feels like we're in a new part of the universe. And it's only 4 days since that transition's happened. So I may save that part for a Sunday night show, and we'll kind of do a bit of a review and kind of review this Pluto-Sun conjunction, which I think has been absolutely game-changing in terms of the paradigm. And we'll get into more of that on Sunday night. So why don't we shift there? Why don't we stop there? We'll come back on Sunday night and we'll do a review, and we'll get into some more of the Astro goodies that are out there. Don't forget, if you would like to get a reading, you can do that through my website, robertphoenix.com. A link is there in the show description. And also, if you feel like buying me a cup of coffee and supporting the show that way, you can do that as well. Go join Locals. I'm over there more. We'll have some more goodies for our Locals friends in the weeks to come. Just did 2 back-to-back webinars with Locals. And we'll do some more of that stuff. We'll do some Q&As, and I'll have some specials for the supporting members as well. All right, take good care, everybody. Treat each other well. Much love. I'll be back on Sunday night. God bless. Bye for now.